Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at the FlyWoo FireFly Baby. It's a 4-motor version of the Hex, but the Hex carries more weight, such as a GoPro, far better. The flight stack is the Goku F411. It's a 16x16 mounting with a 13 amp ESC. And the receiver right next to my finger there is the Goku VTX625, which is a power switchable VTX at the 450 milliwatts. And attached to that VTX is the Atomic circular polarized antenna. Motors are 1202.5, 5500 kV. Props are the HQ 40mm quad bladed props. Mine's the FR Sky version, so it has the XM Plus in here. Does come with a capacitor, Xt30 for your battery connection. The rubberized battery mat down here is super sticky, and the strap is silicone lined. And the FPV camera is the Capacitor Xt30. There are optional accessories available on the FlyWoo.net website, such as the naked GoPro mount, which I did use, the SMO 4K camera mount, as well as the Insta360 Go mount. It does come with these kind of skeleton prop guards for extra safety, and maybe if you're flying inside. Get an assortment of screws and nuts and some small nylon standoffs, an extra battery strap which is not silicone lined, 2 zip ties, flight stack wiring map, a paper pointing to the link to download the manual, and 2 stickers. When flying more aggressively, I did enjoy using their 300 milliamp 4S battery. But if you want more flight time, but you can feel the extra weight, a 450 milliamp 4S battery will work just fine. It does come with an extra set of props, but I'm down to just 2 spares. As you can see, they break right there at the hub. So use the prop guards if you're adverse to breaking props on crashes. On my scale, with the silicone-lined battery strap, it weighs 50 3/4 grams. With the battery I preferred, which is the 300 milliamp 4S battery, it weighs just over 89 grams. But if you want more flight time and you feel that extra weight, a 450 milliamp 4S battery weighs over 102.5 grams. If we add a naked GoPro and the mount, I do have the nut and the screw in here, it weighs about 131.5 grams. If you tack on the prop guards onto that, you get 137 and over 1/4 grams. The unibody bottom plate looks to be 1.5 millimeters thick, and the top plate appears to be 1 millimeter thick. And motor post to motor post, it looks to be about 82 millimeters. So this is our faster, more aggressive sort of flight. I am using that 300 milliamp 4S battery from FlyWoo. I really don't know if anyone else makes a 300 milliamp 4S battery, but I found the mixture of the additional weight as well as my flying style that this suited me the best. We do get a flight time of over 4 minutes, but I will drain the battery just a touch low, and you know, it's not going to be the smoothest ever flight around, but I flew this on a bunch of different batteries and a bunch of different configurations. I didn't try every, HD camera I have, and I'll show you a number of different clips here. Of course, we try to do full flights, and I think if you're wanting to carry an HD camera, whether it's an Insta360 Go 2, which weighs a little bit more than its original, or a naked GoPro, or an SMO 4K, you should probably look at the Hex. That's why I had that in the quick specs, is that I felt that the Hex handles the extra weight far better. Of course, the Hex costs more. You've got extra motors. You've got a flight controller that can handle extra motors. So your expense goes up with that. But if you really want this form factor from FlyWoo and you want to carry, a naked GoPro, Insta360 Go, SMO 4K, just like I said, you're better off looking at the Hex, and we'll get to that a little bit. But as far as an analog version, flying 3 minutes in the flight style I want, no, it's not a blazer, it's not a rocket ship. It's got 40 millimeter props, so we've got a limited amount of thrust there, but for this sort of size and footprint and prop size, it flies well. It's tuned well, which I always appreciate, so I don't have to spend time tuning things. And it's one of those things that if you like a form factor, then you might be interested in something like this. I can do my punch outs over the house both ways adequately. It flips and rolls just fine. I can do various other things, kind of racing around, hard 180 turns at speed. It handles those things just fine. I do know that they offer a DJI or Vista-based version of this, and my gut feeling is that's going to fly a lot like if you add a GoPro to it, which makes aggressive flying very, very difficult. Matter of fact, I hit one punch out in all my exploration where I didn't pilot into the ground, and I had to come out fairly early out of the dive portion of the punch out and had to give it max throttle, 100% throttle, in order to not hit the deck, because I did hit the deck a number of times. But I guess when I say deck, hopefully that's clear, I mean I crashed into the ground. And I guess that says something about its durability. because I didn't have any breakages outside of props. I did mention the props that I was down to just 2 spares, and the props, they just break right at the hub. Whenever you break one, they don't really bend or bend back. They just snap off, and I suspect that's just part of that prop design. You could, of course, put different props on there. The Gem Fan props that are quad bladed, I think, are much more hardy. Of course, I haven't flown those props on a quad this heavy, but there is an opportunity to try those out. Here as we land, we're going to go back to the home screen, and you see that my battery voltage is going to come back up to 3.45 volts per cell. I suspect we're about 4 or 5 seconds too long in that flight time, so a little over 3 minutes of flight on that 300 milliamp 4S battery. This is our GoPro, our naked GoPro. It's a Hero 6. FPV stabilization is on, so you'll see it kind of snap every once in a while. I think newer naked GoPros do it a little bit better. The Insta360 Go, I think, also does a little bit better as far as the yawing around. Maybe not. In the moment, I'm trying to think back to the last time I used the Insta360 Go. It does come with a lead for the SMO4K, so that you could use that camera natively. I made an adapter, and because I've used the GoPro a number of times, I went with that. I haven't used my SMO4K much. I've verified that it works, but I haven't actually flown it on too many quads. So I just made an adapter. I go with what works. And, you know, it's all personal preference on which HD camera you're going to add. But this is a little bit, I would call this a fast cruise. And I tried to match the angle that the native mount that you can get from FlyWoo and my analog camera. And I think I ended up with a little bit, maybe 3 degrees too much angle on my FPV camera, which resulted in a little bit of a faster sort of cruisy. You know, it's not sin whooping by any stretch, but I do want to give you this flight to look at as far as how it performs. You'll be able to hear it. Unfortunately, you can't see the throttle, but of course, when you've added weight such as a naked GoPro and the larger battery, the 450 milliamp 4S battery, that you're running a little bit higher on the throttle. Again, I've already mentioned it, and FlyWoo knows this. I already talked to them about the fact that I think the Hex handles the extra weight of an HD camera far better than this one does. But if you would rather go with something that's a little less expensive and 4 motors instead of 6 and have, you know, reduced repair costs by chance, then, you know, this is what it will do. It really, you can fly it more aggressively, but it's still sort of a flat flight or more of a muted aerobatic sort of maneuver if you do try to do it with an HD camera. And I'll show back at the desk kind of picture in picture, and I'll clip out the parts where I pilot into the ground, because every time I did a punch out, except for that one that I mentioned where I came out really early out of the flight, I just kept piling it into the ground. I just could not get out of the dive quick enough and apply enough throttle. Well, at least to make it look decent. I mean, you could flatten out and punch the throttle and hopefully you won't pile into the ground, but it just looks terrible. So when I say it can't do it, it can't do it and do it like other quads can. So if you want to fly this with a GoPro, this sort of flight is going to be very manageable, and you can fly it more aggressive, but coming in from a punch out, the dive portion is very challenging and doesn't look great. That's one of the factors in just having reduced thrust and having the added weight. The unibody bottom plate, you know, that does mean if you break an arm that you have to replace the entire bottom plate. You can, of course, find spares all over the place. Wherever you can find this is being sold, they'll have spare bottom plates, top plates, the various components. We should be seeing those show up at the shops if they're not already, that they'll be showing up shortly. Of course, if a quad is more popular, more shops will carry the replacement parts for it as well. The price on this can vary. It depends upon if you go HD, which is the Caddx Vista, or if you go analog. In my case, with the analog, I see the price coming in at about $152. And of course, they have extra add-ons you can buy, various camera mounts, the silicone battery strap, and various other things that you can tack on to your purchase that's going to increase the price. If you go with something like the HD version, that runs almost $300. And again, even though they've made it naked, I think the additional weight is going to kind of keep you out of adding a GoPro or external HD camera to the quad. And you can see as we settle there into the ground that the FPV stabilization kind of jiggles there in the air. But that's a 4-minute cruising flight with a 450 milliamp battery. So up here in the corner, I'll play the flights or I'll just play one flight for brevity. You know, I don't want to make this a terrible long video for you to watch. The flight up in that corner is going to be where I'm trying to fly it with a naked GoPro and the mount. And I'm trying to be more aggressive and do the more typical things that I like to do when I fly quads. And you'll see me, I think it's 3 times in one flight where I do a punch out over the house and I just don't recover in time. So I crash into the yard. And so we've got this native SMO 4K connection that you can use. This antenna, whoops, I need to get that back in its slot. If you get a Crossfire version, the antenna will come through here. The antenna isn't mounted down in here. It's just kind of secured through compression. In my case, I tucked this wire underneath here to keep it out of harm's way when I was flying without an external camera. They did zip tie down the lead, so that's a good thing. You know, it's one thing that I always talk about with these is that if you have a battery ejection and it pulls on here and you don't have it secured here, then it pulls on the ESC pads, and that if it pulls off is a really difficult sort of repair. So I appreciate the fact that FlyWoo is one of maybe 2 or 3 companies out there that appears to be doing this. I don't know if they do it on all their quads or not. Let me check the Hex. I believe I added that to the Hex. So maybe they're taking a tip from me. No, I don't want to take credit for that. I want to show you something here. It's fairly interesting. This new battery mat that they've got. Of course, hopefully you can tell this is silicone lined. This is from Prop Strikes. I tried to fly a 260 milliamp battery just to see what I could do. One of the things about going slow is that it allows me extra time instead of just doing one-day flight reviews, that I can try a bunch of different batteries and I can fly them in different sorts of wind and weather to see how they respond. And I just think for me, it takes me longer to get a fix on a quad than, you know, an afternoon's flights. I need a series of flights for it to really come to life for me to just settle into my mind. Before we get there, before I forget, also note that they're only using 2 screws per motor. I don't have a problem with that, but you may. It's really a personal preference there. I've crashed it a bunch, didn't have any problems with it. But back to this battery mat. I want to stick this on my finger here. And I know it's going to be hard to see, but let me see if I can get this out of the way. I just wanted to show this to you. I'm looking through the camera, so I'm going to push my finger down in there. It's starting to come loose. It's coming loose. There, it finally fell off. I really was pretty impressed because the only other grip that does that is Grip. So they've developed their own sort of battery mat. I do wish it was a touch thicker because, as you can see, it's about the thickness of the heads, the hex heads on these M2 screws. So I do wish this was just a touch thicker so that you had the ability to compress the battery down into the mat to where the battery wasn't being compressed into the screws. And the silicone that's on here, it's not real tacky, but really we just need some tackiness in order to be able to really hold on to our battery. I would prefer it have a buckle, but you know, even when I'd put a battery in here and I would really tense it down over this buckle, you can see I didn't tear it loose, which I think without this silicone lining on it, it would tear loose. I mean, I'm talking about the loop here. So I think the silicone helps to make this overall battery strap just a little stronger. You may have noticed it. I failed to point it out when we were talking about the flight video. You could see a touch of this. Now, it could be that maybe, no, it's fully seated. So you can just see in the top right-hand corners, and you may want to go back and watch the analog flight footage. You could just see this protection just a touch in the top corner. So that might be something that bothers you. It might not. I just wanted to point it out in case it is something that's a big deal to you. Personally, for me, you know, a little bit of camera protection is better than none. TPU is going to provide some camera protection. How much? You know, if you go clad into a tree or a concrete building or something like that, I wouldn't expect the TPU to fully protect the lens. But if you have a glancing blow or you have a slower or more modest crash into something directly, then it might help us maintain the integrity of the camera. Also, the TPU mount for the camera might give a little bit, so we have some shock absorption on crashes. That antenna just won't stay back there, will it? I didn't have that problem when I was flying it, only here on the desk. The motors aren't, the motor wires, excuse me, they're not secured down, but the lengths are really short and they don't have a lot of excess wire in here to the ESC. So that's really not an issue. You've got really short arms here, but if you were, say you're someone who gets hung up in trees on a regular basis, you fly in a real treed area and you tend to come through them, maybe you want to take a little bit of tape and wrap it around the arms just to eliminate the possibility that a branch or something gets in through there. Also, this does come with a core temperature warning by default, at least on mine. If you see that pop up, I've never had a problem with the core temperature getting hot and any sort of damage come around. So for me, I would just disable that. I don't think that's useful information because I've never seen it be relevant. I've just continued to fly, and like, it gets up to 80°, and then I take off, and 40 seconds into that flight, then it cools right back down and that temperature warning goes away. So I would just disable that. It's just going to get in your view. But we all have different preferences about that. I did have to replace the receiver. This is not so much about the quad, but more about FrSky. This receiver seems to be coming with the new firmware. I did not want to fuss with flashing the firmware, being as I was going to have to take the receiver out to flash it. I decided just to take the receiver out that came with it and add my own receiver, which I knew was compatible with my radios. One of the reasons why I have kind of advocated, as well as I think others, to move away from FrSky pretty much entirely. They make nice radios and they've made good receivers for a long time, but what they're doing with the firmware really makes it difficult for others. So if you're picking something up, whether it's this quad or something else, if you have an FrSky radio, you've got to do what you've got to do. But I think going to an alternate is becoming more and more something that we probably need to do because of that firmware issue. You don't know what's going to be coming on the receiver, and the only way to know is to flash it. Receivers don't come with a little servo connection that you need to be able to flash it, so you've got to have that. Little bit of a rant there on FrSky. They can always reverse direction at any point. I don't think they're gonna, but I would sure appreciate it if they did. I think if you're not going to use an HD camera on top, I would desolder this lead, which goes right down here behind the camera. It doesn't go to the camera, it goes to the flight controller here. So if you're not going to use an HD camera, I would just take that off. If you don't have a soldering iron, I suppose you could clip the wires really close. That's not my preference. My preference would be to desolder the wires, but if you're averse to that, would clip them off with a pair of wire snips or something really close. Of course, you've got some deconstruction you're going to have to do to get very close with some wire snips down there. As far as the props and not getting them down all the way, this is about as far as down as I could get them, and that is a little bit disappointing. We could make it better by drilling them out, but again, that's an extra step. If you have a drill and you know the drill bit works for 1.5 millimeter motor stems, then I would encourage you to drill them out just a touch so you can get those motor or props all the way down. But the props break at the hub, so they're not super stiff props, so that's not a huge issue with bending a motor shaft. So, I crashed it a number of times, didn't bend any motor shafts, so I didn't see any extra vibrations or jello in the video. So, not an issue, it's just my preference would be that the props go all the way down to the hub. And to wrap up, if you're looking at these sort of form factor and you're wanting to carry an external camera, you can see I've still got the mount on my Hex. I would pick up the Hex. This flies nicely and it's less expensive than the Hex. You've got 2 less motors. You've got a ESC that can handle 6 motors over here, so you have some extra cost, but you get more thrust, you get more authority when you're carrying extra weight with the 6 motors. But the 4 motors in an analog configuration, I think, flew pretty nicely. Not a rocket ship, but it's super small, and it's fun to fly around in appropriate spaces. I'll have links down in the video description to where you can pick these both up. I'll list the baby quad first, and I'll list the Hex second. You can choose what you want to go after if you are interested. If you're looking at the DJI version, I guess it's this one that comes with the DJI. It is naked. They've removed the heat sinks. Many people have done that. It's not a big deal, but something that you need to be aware of when you're looking at the DJI version. Not saying that's wrong, just saying be aware of it. If you do have any comments, questions, suggestions, otherwise, please let me know in the comments section below. What'd you think? If you've seen both these videos, which one would you rather have? Even if you're not in the market to buy one. If you're just choosing, someone hands you some money to buy one, which one do you buy? I appreciate your time. And thanks for watching.